Welcome to Defense Briefing. The content of the briefing includes no Slump, Sherlock, and other dogs that didn't bark in 2023. Key Hamas plotters of October 7 elude Israel's grip on Gaza. Stakes change, but an old fight over a chunk of South America flares again. Who is Fat Leonard, the fugitive Venezuela turned over to the U.S.? Palestinians support Hamas decision to go to war with Israel, survey suggests, with no political solution on horizon. No Slump, Sherlock, and other dogs that didn't bark in 2023. Bloomberg. In this article, financial columnist John Authors reflects on some of the dogs that didn't bark in 2023, events that were expected to happen but ultimately did not occur. Authors notes that the U.S. economy did not experience a recession, despite predictions of a sharp slowdown at the start of the year. This was due to a combination of factors, including the long duration of U.S. debt, positive fiscal impulses, and excess savings held by consumers. The lack of a recession also had implications for the real estate market, which performed better than expected. Author suggests that the arrival of lower interest rates helped to avert a crisis in the commercial property sector. Authors also discusses the resilience of the banking sector, which was expected to face a crisis due to rising long-term bond yields and an inverted yield curve. However, the sector survived, largely due to the creditworthiness of clients and the liquidity provided by central banks. In terms of geopolitics, Authors notes that while there were many alarming events, including conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East, there was no major economic or market impact. This was largely due to the ability of the global energy market to adapt to disruptions caused by these conflicts. Overall, Authors argues that the ability to adapt to unexpected shocks helped to avert the expected recession and crisis in various sectors. Looking ahead to 2024, he suggests that there are still major conflicts and potential disruptions on the horizon, but the lesson from 2023 is that the capacity to adapt can be greater than expected. Key Hamas plotters of October 7 elude Israel's grip on Gaza. New York Times. Israel has offered a $400,000 reward for information leading to the arrest of Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas in Gaza. The Israeli military dropped flyers over Gaza asking for tips on the whereabouts of top Hamas leaders, promising hefty bounties to anyone who helped bring about their arrest. Israel's stated goal in the war is to destroy Hamas, but it has yet to locate Sinwar and other senior Hamas figures considered key plotters of the attack that set off the war 10 weeks ago. The elusiveness of these top Hamas figures is depriving Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government of tangible proof to show both his domestic audience and a growing chorus of foreign leaders calling for a ceasefire that Israel is progressing toward its goal of wiping out Hamas. Stakes change, but an old fight over a chunk of South America flares again. New York Times. The territorial dispute between Venezuela and Guyana over the Essequibo region has reignited, due to Venezuela's president, Nicolas Maduro, unveiling new maps displaying the region as part of Venezuela. The claim to the 150,000 square kilometer region, which is oil-rich and nearly the size of Florida, has been revived by Venezuela. Meanwhile, Guyana, one of South America's poorest countries, is experiencing economic growth due to oil discoveries made by ExxonMobil, which are transforming the country into a global energy powerhouse. As a result, Venezuela is denouncing ExxonMobil and has initiated its own bidding process for oil leases in Guyanese territory. The territorial dispute has led the U.S. to increase its military cooperation with Guyana, although the likelihood of actual clashes between Venezuela and Guyana is low. Political analysts in Venezuela argue that President Maduro is using the dispute to rally support ahead of next year's elections. The dispute also complicates the Biden administration's efforts to improve relations with Venezuela. Who is Fat Leonard, the fugitive Venezuela turned over to the U.S.? Washington Post. The Venezuelan government has handed over Leonard Glenn Francis, known as Fat Leonard, to U.S. authorities. Francis was the owner of Glenn Defense Marine Asia, a Singapore-based company that held $250 million in U.S. defense contracts to resupply and service U.S. Navy ships in ports throughout Asia. In exchange for bribes including prostitutes, Francis defrauded U.S. taxpayers of an estimated $50 million. Francis had fled the U.S. in 2020 before he was due to be sentenced, but was arrested in Venezuela and has now been handed over to the U.S. as part of a wider prisoner exchange. Palestinians support Hamas' decision to go to war with Israel, survey suggests, with no political solution on horizon. CNN. According to a new survey by the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research, nearly three-quarters of Palestinians support Hamas' decision to go to war with Israel. The survey, which was conducted in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, found that 72% of respondents believed that Hamas' attack on Israel was correct. This support for Hamas' decision does not necessarily mean that Palestinians support the atrocities committed by the group, as the survey also found that 80% of respondents believed that killing women and children in their homes is a war crime. The survey also found that support for violence has been rising dramatically in the West Bank, with 68% of respondents supporting armed struggle. In Gaza, support for armed struggle has remained relatively stable at 42%. The survey also found that support for Hamas as a political party has increased in the West Bank, while support for the Secular Nationalist Party of Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas, Fatah, has fallen. The survey also found that support for the two-state solution has remained largely stable, but is still historically low. Maureen Sweeney, weather watcher who influenced D-Day plans, dies at 100. Washington Post. Maureen Flavin, a postal clerk in County Mayo, Ireland, contributed to a significant moment in World War II when she alerted the British Met Office to an oncoming storm in June 1944. The invasion of Normandy, known as D-Day, was planned for June 5 with June 4 as an alternative date. The data collected by Flavin and other weather watchers suggested that the weather would be too severe on June 5, and so the invasion was postponed to June 6. The weather forecast was essential for the success of the operation, as a bad forecast would have resulted in the loss of thousands of lives and equipment. Flavin's observations and other weather reports indicated that there were two major low-pressure areas, which created a cyclone effect that brought strong winds and rain to the English Channel from June 4 to June 5. The weather cleared up on June 6, and the invasion took place as planned. Flavin's contribution to D-Day was unknown for over a decade until the connections were made between the weather data and the postponement of the invasion. Saudi Arabia holds back as U.S. Red Sea Task Force tests ties. Japan Times. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, UAE, have chosen not to participate in the new naval coalition protecting Red Sea shipping from Yemen's Houthi group. Despite having a well-equipped military and relying on Red Sea ports for a significant portion of imports, both countries are focused on extricating themselves from the ongoing war in Yemen and their feud with Iran, the main backer of the Houthis. The absence of Saudi Arabia and the UAE from the coalition highlights their strategic priorities and their desire to avoid further entanglement in the conflict. Update: 10 Americans freed by Venezuela in U.S. prisoner swap land at Texas base. Yahoo! The Americans freed by Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro's government in a U.S. prisoner swap have landed at a U.S. military base in Texas. Those freed were released in exchange for the U.S. release of Colombian businessman Alex Saab. U.S. prosecutors had accused Saab of siphoning off some $350 million from Venezuela via the United States in a scheme that involved bribing Venezuelan government officials. As part of the deal, all 6 Americans wrongly detained in Venezuela were released, along with 4 other Americans. Saab denies the charges against him. Americans struggle to save relatives in Gaza stalked by war, hunger. Washington Post. This article discusses the current situation in Gaza, where many people are trapped due to the war. The U.S. State Department has so far helped 1,300 Americans and legal permanent residents to leave Gaza, but there are still many more who are stuck there. The U.S. has no control over who can leave Gaza, as decisions are made by Israel, Egypt and Hamas. The process is unpredictable and opaque, sometimes only certain members of a family appear on the list, and sometimes nobody does. The article includes the story of Fadi Skak, an American student at Sunnyvale, whose father, Abed Allah, was killed in the conflict. Skak's mother is now sheltering in Gaza City, but she cannot travel to Rafah because the roads are unsafe. There are many other similar stories of people trapped in Gaza. The current war in Gaza has led to the deaths of nearly 20,000 people, according to the Gaza Health Ministry. It has also destroyed many buildings, leaving people without homes or shelter. Schumer on Ukraine negotiations: Democrats are real about border security. Washington Post. Senate Majority Leader Charles E. Schumer, Democrat, New York, said in an interview Wednesday he has hoped that Republicans will back an eventual deal to swap immigration policy changes for aid to Ukraine as the Senate leaves town for the holidays without resolving the issue. I think they realize it's the right thing to do, and I think they realize that Democrats have moved much more to the middle on border security, Schumer said. Well, my dear viewers, what a year it has been. 2023 has certainly been full of surprises and unexpected turns. As your trusty Six Doctor, I'm here to share with you some of the most intriguing stories that didn't quite go as planned. So, grab your cup of tea, sit back, and let's dive into the world of dogs that didn't bark. First up, we have the U.S. economy. The recession that never was. Despite all the predictions and doom and gloom at the start of the year, the U.S. managed to avoid a recession. How, you ask? Well, it seems a combination of factors came to the rescue. The long duration of US debt, positive fiscal impulses, and excess savings held by consumers all played a part. And let's not forget the arrival of those lower interest rates that saved the day for the commercial property sector. It just goes to show, sometimes things aren't as bad as they seem. Next, let's talk about the banking sector. You know, that sector that was supposed to face a crisis due to rising bond yields and an inverted yield curve. Well, guess what? It survived. Thanks to the creditworthiness of clients and the liquidity provided by central banks, the banking sector managed to weather the storm. So, no crisis here, folks. Move along. Now, let's take a look at geopolitics. Conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East. Alarming events, no doubt. But did they have a major economic or market impact? Surprisingly, no. The global energy market proved its adaptability and managed to handle the disruptions caused by these conflicts. It just goes to show, sometimes the world has a way of balancing itself out. And speaking of conflicts, let's talk about the territorial dispute between Venezuela and Guyana. This old fight over a chunk of South America has flared up once again. Venezuela, feeling a bit left out of the oil game, decided to revive its claim to the oil-rich Essequibo region. Meanwhile, Guyana, thanks to oil discoveries by ExxonMobil, is experiencing economic growth and transforming into an energy powerhouse. This dispute has not only increased military cooperation between Guyana and the US but also complicated the Biden administration's efforts to improve relations with Venezuela. Oh, the drama! But let's not forget about the lighter side of the news. Remember Maureen Flavin, the weather watcher from County Mayo, Ireland? Well, her observations back in 1944 played a crucial role in the success of the D-Day invasion. She alerted the British Met Office to an oncoming storm, which led to the postponement of the invasion. Talk about being in the right place at the right time. It just goes to show, sometimes the weather can change the course of history. And finally, we have the story of those Americans struggling to save their relatives in Gaza. The ongoing war has left many people trapped, and the process of leaving Gaza is unpredictable and opaque. The US State Department has helped some, but there are still many more who are stuck there. It's a heartbreaking situation, and one that reminds us of the human cost of conflict. So, my dear viewers, what can we learn from all these dogs that didn't bark? Well, it seems that adaptability is key. The ability to weather unexpected shocks and find creative solutions can make all the difference. As we look ahead to 2024, let's remember that there will always be conflicts and disruptions on the horizon. But perhaps, just perhaps, our capacity to adapt is greater than we think. And now, I turn to you, my wonderful audience. What are your thoughts on these stories? Do you have any burning questions or insightful comments? Let's open the floor and have a lively discussion. Remember, the world is full of surprises, and together, we can make sense of it all. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.